Given two speeches on health care this week, the first being the address to Congress. In the following day, Martin Feldstein wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal. You may recall this. When they first started talking about Obamacare, you were hearing figures of 1.62 trillion, and then when the reaction to it, all of a sudden that figure was buried. But Feldstein talked about, for example, the Bush prescription benefit program. The real facts were hidden from Congress and the public. It was sold to the public on a cost of $500 billion. Feldstein said it's going to run $8 trillion, and he's talking about the true deficit created under Obamacare is closer to $2 trillion. How could we be adding $2 trillion to the deficit and a deficit plan that the CBO and the Obama administration just updated will grow by $9 trillion, Bud, but that assumes in the next 10 years that the unemployment rate comes down, the economy grows at 3% every year, and we never have another recession for another 10 years. Those are unrealistic.
Exactly. It's very unrealistic. The GDP is not going to grow. It's going to, I don't think, collapse, but perhaps could be very, very sluggish for a long time. And watch out in the middle of that. The assumptions that are in those budget projections, and I've spent a lot of time poring over them, suggest that the interest rate is going to stay around 5% on what the government debt is. When the government debt becomes hugely recognized for being inflationary, people aren't going to loan huge amounts of money to the government to fund its deficit at 5%. They're going to want 10%, more like what we had during the late 1970s or beginning of 1980s. And when you double that into the expected projected deficit, what happens is it's a very hard thing to calculate because you have to borrow the interest that you're paying on the debt. And then it compounds itself. I think you can understand the mechanics, even if you don't have to do the calculation. But the net is, you're absolutely right, that the projections of the government for how bad the deficit is likely to be are significantly worse than what they are now predicting, just with sensible assumptions, as you pointed out about GDP, and I'm pointing out about interest rates. And when you combine that together, the interest burden grows and becomes even bigger than the healthcare burden, which is now projected to be the biggest government sector of growth and why there are a lot of people worrying about the problem. But in the article, I have a chart of the historical projection that the government made of how bad the deficit would be, starting in about 2000 when everybody said we are in a surplus now and the surplus is going to get better. And, of course, where we are now, if you look at the chart, it just graphically jumps out at you that we just went into a hole, and for some reason they're predicting we're going to come right out of it in terms of the deficits projected into the future, and I don't think they're going to come out of it, so to speak, anywhere near as well as they have suggested they would be. Pretty complicated to do without a chart in front of us, but I think you can understand what I'm saying. Basically, the government is overly optimistic, and the result is always worse.
Yeah, in the situation that where I guess I agree with a lot of the assumptions being made by the deflationist, you take a look at the size of these budget deficits, and they're going to get bigger in the next decade. In fact, the Obama administration has already updated their deficit projections twice, and that's before all this other stuff, and assuming these rosy scenarios develop. But, Bud, as the retirement population hits, and even if you take our current budget deficit, which is, what, 1.65 trillion, let's call it 1.7 trillion,
yep,
there isn't enough foreign money to finance that. There isn't enough savings in this country to finance that. There is no alternative.
You're right on.
Can you imagine a politician, let's say a president or a Congress, saying we're not going to give you Social Security and your Medicare benefits? I mean, they're telling us this health care is going to be a free lunch.
Yeah, I used to say, think how much health care is going to cost when it's free. And it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek commentary that nothing is free, and of course somebody's going to have to pay for it, and the somebody is, of course, the general public through taxation. Or, here's what I think you and I would probably agree on if we think about it. It isn't just taxation. It's the hidden taxation created by inflating or devaluing the purchasing power of the dollar rather dramatically and taking away the savings of people who thought they had something in an annuity or something like that. And the result of all that is that we need to go out and actively protect whatever savings or wealth we have by investing it in ways that can protect us from that inflationary action. For us at Casey Research, it's things like gold. We have 2 newsletters that are gold-oriented, and energy. We have a newsletter energy-oriented. And things that are physical as opposed to things that are basically paper. It's to get to physical assets rather than paper. China is doing it right now. It's a wonderful story. If you just look at all the things they are doing, buying up assets around the planet and getting future contracts and various financial arrangements set up. They're buying copper, warehouses of copper, because they obviously believe that copper is going to have a longer standing value than treasury bills. It makes sense from a big picture point of view, and I think we as individuals need to figure out how to do that as well.
You know, we're having a big discussion this month on the Financial Sense News Hour. We're going to bring in 2 prominent deflationists and 2 prominent inflationists. You at Casey Research, in fact, the conclusion to your article, Debt in the Driver's Seat, the last heading is called The Coming Inflation. So you at Casey Research, with all your research staff and the various writers and analysts, you believe there's an inflationary outcome ahead of us rather than deflation.
Yeah, I'd almost go as far as to say that the deflationary worries are somewhat diversionary from the reality of the situation of the huge government deficits and the necessity of Federal Reserve monetization that are on track almost without any alternative available to us right now, to say that it's inevitable that we will get to a very big inflationary problem in the years ahead. I'm not saying it's next month or even perhaps until well into next year, but it's inevitable is the most irrefutable conclusion that I come to.
Bud, if our listeners would like to follow the kind of research and work that you do, how could they do so?
Oh, we have a lot of stuff that's available on our website for free, and we also sell newsletters. It's www.caseyresearch, CASEYRESEARCH.com. Hope people would have an opportunity to look and sign up for quite a number of things that are fun and hopefully good for their wealth in the future.
All right, Bud. Well, listen, I love reading your work and the research that you do. Thanks for joining us on the Financial Sense News Hour. You have yourself a great weekend.
Great, Jim, and thank you for having me on. I always love your work and your website and look forward to catching up with the many things that you do and produce. Appreciate it a lot.